We live in a visual age. From the view of planet Earth from outer space to the beating of our own hearts, we have seen it all. Pictures, not words, dominate. There have been earlier ages of radical expansion in pictorial knowledge. One was in 17th century Holland. This doesn't seem a revolutionary picture. A dairymaid pours milk. The artist, Jan Vermeer, was little known outside Holland for 200 years. Now he is thought among the very greatest. He painted this earthy pickup when he was 24. There's not much doubt as to what's going on. The soldier pours the girl. She puts out her empty hand. He's about to flip a coin in it. Her madam looks on greedily. But who's this toasting us with an enigmatic grin? That must be Vermeer. So who was Vermeer? His ghost might haunt Delft, the small Dutch town where he spent most of his life. He left no letters, no drawings, only 35 paintings. He lived as a child in a house which stood on the central square of Delft. He'd have seen the church, but not a lot else is as it was then. But his pictures survive, and over the years, his reputation has grown.
We all feel like we know Vermeer. He's an artist who didn't paint many paintings, and we could almost envision them as we sort of sit with our eyes closed. We can see the woman pouring milk. We can see a woman reading a letter. We can see a little street. And yet, it's surprising how little we actually do know of him. He didn't explain what he meant in his paintings, what his themes were, what his ideas were, what his underlying philosophical concepts were. How did he come upon this ability to create the sense of light and space in his works? How did he discover the secrets of perspective? He leaves so much to the imagination that he is an artist who will always speak to us, who will always allow new insights and new visions.
All over Europe and America, his pictures have been re-examined, probed and cleaned in preparation for their first joint exhibition for 300 years. Perhaps for the first time ever, a majority of his paintings can be seen together. When so little is known about the artist, his pictures, even the X-ray of them, remain the principal source of our knowledge. The loss of paint and cracks have to be repaired, dirt removed and lost areas restored, confirming Vermeer as one of the most gifted of that golden age of Dutch art.
Vermeer may not have been well known to a wide public before the 20th century, but among those connoisseurs and collectors in the Netherlands, particularly Amsterdam, he was greatly valued. This incredible painting of the milkmaid actually appeared in a sale in 1719, where it was described as the famous milkmaid by Vermeer of Delft, artful, which is a wonderful term. You don't see that very much in descriptions of paintings. And it gives you a sense of the sort of forcefulness and power of this painting, which is always amazing. You look at reproductions of the Milkmaid and you think, my gosh, this must be a huge painting. When you come up to it, it's really very small. And how is it that Vermeer created this sense of monumentality in this woman who seems to embody all of the strength and goodness and vigor of the Dutch people? This very free and expressive technique you see particularly on the bread. It gives a sparkling and animated character to the bread that makes it feel very alive. And it's this quality, which is not something that one normally sees in nature, that makes people think that perhaps he used an optical device called a camera obscura to actually conceive the painting. Not that he actually painted through a camera obscura, but that the diffused highlights, the different points of focus, are optical effects that he would only have found in such an optical device.
The camera obscura was a method of projecting an image, this image here, for instance, through a lens, onto a mirror, and then across onto the canvas. The image will be upside down, but later development corrected this drawback. This was only one step from photography, and must have seemed magical to those who viewed it.
As the Dutch poet Gergen said,
"It is not possible to describe for you the beauty of it. All painting is dead in comparison, for here is life itself."
a portable version was created. This was only one of many new optical devices developed in the Netherlands in the 17th century.
It is true that Vermeer knew Leeuwenhoek, the person who introduced the microscope, and that it was the era of Galileo's telescope. It was the era of Newton and of the new objective science as expressed by and described and generalized by Francis Bacon.
Just as this century has seen immense technological change, the whole story of flight from the Wright brothers to walking in space, so the 17th century drew together the picture of the universe that has dominated until our own day. For the first time, our solar system was accurately plotted, as in this splendid mechanical model which Vermeer might have seen working in the neighbouring Dutch town of Leiden. Born into this time, Vermeer was one of the few very great painters with strong scientific interests. This is his portrait of an astronomer. His globe shows accurately the constellation of stars. He's surrounded by the implements of his trade. Vermeer's only other surviving painting of a single man, that is, a man not accompanied by women, is a geographer. He measures the Earth, just as the astronomer reaches out to comprehend the universe. In fact, in Vermeer's paintings, they may be the same man. Vermeer's model may be one of the leading scientists of the day, Antony von Leeuwenhoek. He also lived in Delft and was Vermeer's exact contemporary. Later in life, he was to administer Vermeer's will. It would have been surprising if they'd not known each other.
Leeuwenhoek studied virtually everything through his microscope. He took maggots. He took human feces. He pulled out some of the tartar of his own teeth. And this, in fact, is one of those extraordinary microscopes of the sort that Leeuwenhoek made himself and used for his researches for a long time in Delft. The real vital bit is the lens, so tiny that you might not even see it. It is a spherical lens of about 1 millimeter in diameter. And one beautiful example of what he saw and how this was shown is in this copy of his book. And this is a louse. The plate shows it in the original size, very tiny, and then, this is a striking picture, it shows the louse stuck on that very same piece of metal here of the microscope with its back. And it shows all the details of its 6 legs and its feelers and its mouth. One of the most stunning observations that he made was his discovery of the spermatozoa in the human sperm. And I have here in front of me a wonderful picture of what he saw and how he saw them teeming through the little microscope.
We are truly as gods if we can see everything from this highest point of the heavens to the tiniest creatures on earth.
Artists also sought to be accurate and true to nature in their pictures. A century before Vermeer, the German artist Dürer had invented this device to aid in the portrayal of perspective.
Any movement on this is huge on the grid. It's a very awkward way of drawing. You really ought to be using a dead body. You can see why this never caught on with artists. You have to make remarkably still and close one eye. And it's very awkward with this stick in front of you. Using this grid to fix the perspective and to help the drawing is just one of the dozens of things artists have tried to do, really to make the first mark easier. It never stops being daunting sitting down to draw something when you've actually, what you're doing is producing a confidence trick. And they've used things like camera obscuras. In fact, I think people thought that Vermeer painted from a camera obscura where you project an image is projected onto a board. He couldn't possibly have done it. Incredibly difficult. He wouldn't have got any of the colours right, so you'd have to do it in the dark.
Living in a small, closely knit community, Vermeer learned to protect his privacy. Yet the Dutch remain immensely curious about their neighbours. This must have been painful to an artist who once told a visiting Frenchman that he had no pictures to show him when he had a roomful next door. In the Dutch countryside, the neat geometrical lines of the canals are a constant reminder of how man gave order and balance to nature. All this confident, scrupulously tended land had been under threat for many decades when Vermeer was born. This was the war with Catholic Spain that stretched over 80 years. The headquarters of the Protestant Dutch resistance was in Vermeer's hometown, Delft. It was here that the great national hero William the Silent was assassinated by a Catholic bullet in 1584. In his youth, Vermeer must often have seen his coldly grandiloquent tomb in the new church in Delft opposite his house. Vermeer's paintings suggest the pride he felt in the achievements of his small, embattled country.
The 80 Years' War had a tremendous impact on Dutch society. A republic was born instead of a monarchy, an independent state instead of a part of a large Spanish empire. And for most, I think important is the birth of an own culture, a culture of middle class, so not a nobility, with a display of wealth not by palaces but by town halls, and with a participation of nearly all social layers of society.
Vermeer's father was well-to-do, a silk weaver as well as an art dealer. Perhaps from him Vermeer gained his appreciation of the texture and variety of fabrics which he displayed with such skill in his paintings. Like his father, he too became an art dealer. The earliest known painting by Vermeer is a scene from the New Testament. Christ is being entertained by the sisters Martha and Mary. Christ, by his position in the painting, links the two attitudes, the active and the contemplative, and seems to come down, as does Vermeer, in favour of the contemplative. Religion was to impinge on his life. Coming from a Protestant home, at the age of 20 he married a Catholic.
He was willing to be converted to Catholicism for the sake of the marriage. He married into a family which was not welcoming. His mother-in-law was against it, as far as we can tell from the beginning. But the interesting thing is that he managed to win over everybody concerned, and when the mother-in-law became one of his most assiduous supporters, leaving money in her will to him personally. And he appears to have had, in that way, let's not say winning ways, but to be determined about getting on with what he wanted to do, which was to paint 2 paintings a year. This is a slow painter and needs the means to do it. The mother-in-law's household in which to live, in which to paint.
There was a price to pay for becoming a Catholic.
The Dutch Republic was by birth a Protestant state, and Protestantism was the only officially recognized religion. The new authorities took over the churches of the Catholic, the monasteries, and the land they owned, and they gave it to the Protestants. And Catholic services were officially forbidden. So Catholics were, to a certain extent, second-rank citizens. But there is another side too. For in practice there was more tolerance. And as far as Catholic churches were carried out in private and the Catholics wouldn't disturb the public order, they were allowed to do it.
This poster shows Catholic houses of worship open for services, like this house in Amsterdam. Perhaps the need to keep a low profile influenced Vermeer's choice of themes and the ambiguity of the way he rendered their message. The difference in his attitude to that of a contemporary artist who was also painting in Delft at the same time is very apparent. Peter de Hooch brought a direct, robust joviality to his domestic scenes. It was the first age where individual middle-class taste counted. The wealthy merchants favoured, as the aristocracy had done, portrayals of people much like themselves, acting out their tastes, interests and moral concerns. Vermeer must have known the work of artists like Nicholas Mace, the idle servant. But this sort of folksy humour wasn't his style. He was looking for something more subtle. His portrayal of a girl asleep is awkward in overall composition, but brilliant in detail. Unlike the idle servant, she looks more gentle and sad than slothful. The clutter of objects on the table suggests that Vermeer is still experimenting with ways to express his theme. The crumpled rug seems both too large in the foreground and too distant on the girl's side of the table.
While a painting stolen from the Byte collection in Dublin was rediscovered in 1993, we had the opportunity to make a first examination of the painting while it was still in Antwerp. And there we discovered that the central vanishing point used by Vermeer to create his perspective was actually found in the eye of the seated woman behind the desk. These 2 squares are imaginary paintings, and Vermeer would apply a nail in the wall on either side of the painting, and he would take a piece of string, apply chalk to the string, and he would place it on one of the distance points, and by snapping the string on one side of the painting, and one can make the 2 diagonals which can be drawn in. The distance point formed the tiles on this direction, and we would have another 2 lines to be made from the right side, and we can create a floor tile which one can see has a certain distortion. It looks as if it bends down or falls out of the painting. But if Vermeer moved the distance points further away, as in the second drawing, we have the distance point here now much further away from the painting itself and its central vanishing point, and he again would apply his chalk string for the floor tiles. One would be able to see that the floor tiles created here would have a much flatter appearance, and one would have a floor which would not be distorted at the corners of the paintings. It so happens that the chronology of Vermeer's paintings shows that Vermeer later in his career indeed moved the distance points further away from the central vanishing point in order to create floors which have a much more natural appearance than the former floor tiles or floors he made in his early paintings, where one kind of looks into a funnel with windows placed at very short receding lines here, and you would have here windows which would be of a much less distorted scale, all depending on the line of the horizon in the paintings. And I will demonstrate on another painting how this actually took place. On this beautiful painting from the Queen's collection in London, one can see Vermeer would eventually have placed a pin in the wall, one in the vanishing point, which is placed on the sleeve of the woman playing, and one on the wall to the far right. And as one can see by placing the strings, the floor tiles can be very precisely determined, and he can have used the chalk line to place all these tiles completely as they would have been according to the distance points, and with the central vanishing point, elements like the windows can be precisely estimated, and also the table in the foreground. As we have seen how precise the chalk lines have been used to create the perspective, we can make compositional drawings of the painting, and we can see how every detail of the architecture and of the floor has been carefully constructed using the distance points placed on the horizons on either side, and having the central vanishing point to coincide with this perfect creation of a spatial illusion.
One of the earliest pictures in which Vermeer was able to use his technical skill to produce an apparently simple image is The Little Street. Nothing unexpected is occurring, yet the picture seems satisfyingly complete. The children are absorbed in playing their game, which we cannot even see, nor can we fathom the thoughts of the women going about their daily tasks. Nor shall we know who lived behind those neat windows. It doesn't matter. Like the English writer Thomas Hardy, Vermeer makes us believe this will go on the same though dynasties past. The weekly fair at Middelburg. Capital of the southern province of Zeeland, Middelburg was one of the towns that suffered siege and sometimes occupation from the armies of Spain during the 80-year war. The division in beliefs between Catholic and Protestant is still evident in the traditional costume of some of the older women. The sharp, pointed headgear is worn by the Catholics, the round bonnets by the Protestants. So brutal was the campaigning of the Duke of Alva that both sects were drawn together in opposition to the Spanish invaders. It was the resistance of the individual towns that won them freedom, generally commemorated by the splendor of the town hall. Urban pride is even visible in such a reticent artist as Vermeer. He embodied it in a brilliant display of light. Light makes the officer and laughing girl one of his most joyful pictures. Vermeer was probably influenced by looking through optical lenses that would accentuate, as photography does, the change in proportion from the nearer to the further figure. The map of Holland, connected as it is with the figure of the girl, suggests her patriotic admiration for this citizen soldier. The map still exists, a silent tribute to Vermeer's accuracy.
The Dutch were leading map makers and publishers. They needed maps to take their land out of the sea and construct it, as well as to chart the far-flung routes of their trading vessels. They used maps to report on battles or to display civic pride. And like pictures, maps were used to decorate domestic walls. By means of his art, the painter can bring the world into his studio. But Vermeer's view of Delft almost miraculously offers the presence of the thing itself.
This painting is extremely interesting because Vermeer actually tried to build up a three-dimensionality in the surface texture. The foreground in the front has been painted with very thick paint, where the brush strokes are very visible in the paint surface still. The water, on the contrary, is very smoothly painted, and one doesn't see actual paint being applied there. The cityscape itself, on the contrary, has again got a surface texture. This time it is built up by having large lumps of lead white in a underpaint, and further up, before the painting got this cracked pattern, the sky we must imagine as being also very flat and very smooth in the surface. So in fact, the heavy foreground, the smooth water, the grainy surface of the houses and the whole cityscape against the very flat sky makes a three-dimensional build-up in surface texture, which makes it very special for its period indeed. The relative smaller oeuvre of Vermeer has been explained as him being a very slow painter, but I believe that we, as well in this painting, have evidence of him being very rapid in applying his paint when he was actually busy painting. The sky is painted with very quick brush strokes, with large brushes, and in certain areas he even used the handle of the brush to indicate a rough contour of a cloud.
One of the old city gates still exists, but new buildings mask much of Vermeer's view. The distinctive towers of Delft's two churches can still be seen, though the distance between them seems to have changed. X-rays show that Vermeer made lots of small changes to the skyline. The paintings and maps on the walls of Vermeer's pictures often set a mood for the new painting. Thus, the background to the concert contains a picture that's been identified, The Procuress by Dirk van Barbaren. Music can be the food of love, but it need not, as here, be grossly sensual. Vermeer's group seem to be friends rather than lovers, coming together in one of their homes to enjoy an evening of music.
Death meets us everywhere and enters in at many doors, by violence and secret influence, by the aspect of a star and the stink of a mist, by the fall of a chariot and the stumbling at a stone, by a heat or a cold, by water frozen into the hardness and sharpness of a dagger, or water thawed into the floods of a river, by everything in nature and everything in chance.
So wrote a contemporary of Vermeer's, the English preacher Jeremy Taylor. His rhetorical style suited the time. From Shakespeare to Molière, this was the first great century of the European theatre. Its standards of verbal flourish and dramatic effect impinged on all public events, so that even the dissecting room in a medical school became a theatre. The studies of the human body carried out by Vesalius, his detailed charting of muscles or internal organs, were as much works of art as were maps of the period. His corpses pranced with the gestures of a stage Romeo or Cleopatra. Nowadays, the use of television as an aid to surgery has made us all acquainted with the inner geography of the body. In the 17th century, dissection was a new science to be viewed by the privileged few. It attracted a powerful observer in Rembrandt. A generation older than Vermeer, Rembrandt looked at what was there and recorded it with objectivity and a sharp eye on the local worthies who crowded in to witness the event. Whether recording the living or the dead, Rembrandt lets you know his own feelings and reactions as powerfully as he can. In this he was the very opposite to Vermeer. Vermeer never painted a piece of observed realism like the anatomy lesson, nor did he ever reveal his feelings about his models in the way that Rembrandt sought to do. Dutch artists gloried in the material nature of their world. No one portrayed it more beautifully than Vermeer, but he also found ways to show it as an illusion.
This painting, The Music Lesson, is an extraordinary creation, and one of the most successful fusions of art and music, of painting and music, ever created. It is a quiet painting, and as with so many of Vermeer's works, we really don't know what the scene depicts. We don't know who the lady is who's playing at the virginal. We don't know who the gentleman is standing next to it. Is it, in fact, a music lesson, which is the traditional title of the painting? We don't know. A clue may be given on the virginal cover itself, which says, "Music, companion of joy, balm for sorrow."
Perhaps it is also a self-portrait of Vermeer. His wife may be the player of the clavichord. In the mirror above her head can be seen a reflection of the artist's easel, but no artist is present. She looks aside and sees him next to her, but only in the reflection. Another of the many ways Vermeer modified reality to create his composition. Two of his greatest paintings are of a woman reading a letter. We'll reconstruct how one of them was carried out. This is the corner room with the windows that we know from several other paintings by Vermeer. He begins his composition by moving in a table with a dish of fruit on it. It separates us from the woman and makes her seem more private. To fill the wall space behind her, Vermeer puts in a painting that appears in several of his pictures. It shows Cupid. It's based on an emblem meaning that one should only have one lover. Perhaps this was too specific for Vermeer, making it clear that his subject was reading a love letter. So he provides a more ambiguous clue. The half-eaten peach suggests a pleasure tasted but not fulfilled. The reflection on the window in Vermeer's picture looks quite skull-like. Perhaps this is another note of warning on the passage of time, a warning accentuated by the removal of the picture. But painting it over, as Vermeer did, destroyed the balance of the composition. So Vermeer puts in a curtain hanging on a rail that runs right across the top of the picture and increases the quiet theatricality of the scene. Is this a portrait? It seems so natural, a moment frozen as in a snapshot. Yet we know that Vermeer took infinite pains and concentrated thought to achieve the spontaneous. Like the misty lenses and airbrush effects used by photographers of film stars in this century, Vermeer sought to subtly idealize his subject. There is a complete absence of line in the painting. Only color changes give us the contours of the face. In this, Vermeer is unique among painters.
The modeling of the face has then further been accentuated by the reflection of her white collar. This very bright white collar is sending a light reflection up under her cheek, which makes a very faint reflection, rounding the whole cheek very beautifully, just as one sees it happen on the pearl hanging on from her ear, where the light source is being reflected in this large teardrop-formed reflection at the top, and the reflection from her collar will then be on the bottom edge of the pearl, forming the shape of the whole pearl. The mouth of the girl with the slightly parted lips have also been underpainted in reddish tones, and the lips are very diffuse. The transition from the flesh tones to the lips are very well blended, but the final touch of light on her lip, mainly the two highlights on either side, are consistent of two small dabs of paint, which makes the reflection of the light cast on the slightly moistured lips, and one sees a lit area to the right of the mouth from where the light passes through the slightly parted lips onto the cheek.
Many artists, down to and including Matisse, have dressed their models and their backgrounds with great care. But the effect is frequently decorative. The model is part of an overall design and as passively arranged as the vase of flowers and the patterned wallpaper. In Vermeer's paintings, the model is the focus of attention, despite her passivity. Vermeer concentrated, in his maturity, on the private moments of individuals, and he gave them unique and unstated importance.
And now good morrow to our waking souls, which watch not one another out of fear. For love all love of other sights controls, and makes one little room and everywhere. Let sea discoverers to new worlds have gone, let maps to other worlds on worlds have shown. Let us possess one world, each hath one and is one. I was foretold your rebel sex, nor love nor pity knew. And with that scorn you used to vex poor hearts that humbly sue. Yet I believed, to crown our pain, could we the fortress win, the happy lover sure should gain a paradise within. Sweetest love, I do not go for weariness of thee, nor in hope the world can show a fitter love for me. Oh, how feeble is man's power, that if good fortune fall, cannot add another hour, nor a lost hour recall.
In Vermeer's representation of the artist in his studio, we see this picture from behind, the silhouette of the artist seated on a stool. Now, are we right in assuming that that is in fact a picture of the artist himself? Is that Vermeer? And is this first enigmatic image that we have of an artist about whom we now seem to know so little?
Given the scene which he's painting and the model, the map and such, we know this to be in fact the setting which he paints, so we assume it is Vermeer. But the elusiveness of the painter representing himself, as compared, for example, to Rembrandt, is striking. He focuses in the end, on a single woman, alone, upright, self-possessed, in the corner of a room with a window. That's it.
Would one want to say that Vermeer was appealing to a sensibility which was already in place in Holland at that time, or was he actually making a massive contribution to a new sensibility by painting in that way?
To answer that, I would say yes, he's constructing a sensibility. After all, he removes the obvious representation which has eye appeal and object appeal in the art of other Dutch painters. So in that sense, he's producing a taste for something else.
Nowadays, of course, one of the things that we cherish in Vermeer is the very notion of austerity itself, of abstract simplicity. We see in Vermeer things which seem to point forward to the abstract paintings of someone like Mondrian. Now, presumably that was not there consciously in his mind when he was painting.
Well, obviously Mondrian couldn't be in his mind, that's clear. But there is something, and perhaps I turn it another way, Jonathan, and say there is something, after all, schematic, generalized about the way in which to take the women, since they're the major subject, the dominant subject, the way in which he represents them. So there's something generalized and schematic, and indeed against the attempt to identify wife here, daughter number 5 here, or something like that. They are remarkably similar. I mean, there's a kind of Vermeer generalized woman type, which you can trust to come up in picture after picture. I mean, the great difference twixt Vermeer and Mondrian, aside from the difference in when they painted and the worlds around them, is that Vermeer holds on to the human figure.
Everything is an actual object. It is an actual table, an actual window, an actual picture on the wall, and the wall itself is real. But there seems to be behind it something which doesn't figure earlier, which is this, this concern with the arrangement of the physical world in a formal way. Perhaps formality is perhaps a better word for than abstraction.
And maybe we should say poise. And if you look at the hands of the women, the extraordinary care, the faces are quite dead, totally inexpressive, but the hands are hugely carefully, formally arranged, not expressively, but formally arranged. And one feels that it all hangs on the way in which she stands there between outside and inside, light coming in and such. So that's why I say poise rather than formal, because poise includes the human.
I wonder if I could take exception with you on this question of the expressionlessness of the faces. The thing that has always struck me about it is that these poised figures, who are showing none of the classic physiognomic types of expression, there is no rage, there's no fear, there's no lust, they are at rest. But would you like to comment on the idea that these are figures who are expressionless because they are absorbed rather than, as it were, simply devoid of expression, that we are actually witnessing people who are in a state of mind which is very distinctive rather than no state of mind at all?
Fair. I mean, that there is a state of mind.
It represents an intensity of some sort. It's an intensity which doesn't show itself in a smile, in a grimace, in the lighting up of the eye. But it's quite clearly that we are in the presence of consciousness.
We might think of the lace maker in the Louvre, another woman bent over her task, and a task which is more akin to the task of being a painter, since she's dealing with colored threads that are like pigments. So she's dealing with pigment too, in a sense, at one remove.
So he turns our attention towards something which had previously been neglected, which is the nature of attention itself. That previously animation, excitement, drama had been the focus of, say, history paintings. And here are people who are undergoing what most of us spend most of our lives undergoing, which is the petty tasks of life, in which actually most of human energy is invested. So in fact it is not simply in the picture called The Art of Painting that we are seeing painting represented, that in seeing a lady carefully pouring milk and accurately pouring it, in a lady making lace, that we are actually seeing the psychological prerequisites of being a painter, so that it's almost a mirror casting back an image of the necessary mental state required for painting.
I think that's absolutely true.
And I wonder whether it is that he's focusing attention upon something which in fact has previously been overlooked, which is the quiet flow of undirected thought, which perhaps is the most valuable part of human life.
Vermeer could portray an allegorical message, but in an oblique way, as in a woman holding a balance. It's a picture poised between dark and light. Sunlight descends from the invisible window. It falls on the hand delicately holding the balance. Above, the light caresses the gentle contours of the woman's face. Behind is the dark rectangle of a painting of Judgment Day. Immediately above her submissive head, Christ sits in majesty. To judge is to weigh. Christ's raised arms echo the twin pans of the balance. The woman has not placed anything in them as yet. Is she perhaps pregnant, about to bring a new life into the balance? Vermeer was able to give the mundane, domestic interiors of his pictures a significance which was suggested rather than made specific. When he painted a directly allegorical study of the Catholic faith, it was a failure. The balance that is maintained in most of his work between realism and implied meaning was shattered. At about this time, 1672, the equilibrium of the Netherlands itself was broken. Throughout their history, the Dutch have been pioneering seamen and tough adversaries in war. The Dutch Navy had proved more than a match for the British in the Anglo-Dutch sea wars of Vermeer's early manhood. But now King Charles of England made a surprise alliance with Louis XIV of France. While the British patrolled the seas, a crack French army, 150,000 strong, invaded from the south, spreading death and destruction through the Netherlands. It seemed Amsterdam itself would fall. Only the last line of defence, the breaking of the dikes and the subsequent flooding of the lowlands, saved the Dutch from a defeat that would probably have ended their independence. As it was, the country was financially ruined. The market for luxuries such as paintings collapsed. Before the crisis was over, Vermeer was dead at 43. He left his widow, 8 children and a mass of debts. She had to auction his pictures. One she particularly wanted to keep was the allegory of painting. It went too, and Vermeer was forgotten by the outside world for 200 years. In the allegory of painting, Vermeer sets forth many of his themes. The youthful model who poses in a crown of laurel as Clio, the muse of history, seems as modest, tranquil and self-absorbed as those in his earlier paintings. History is present in the map that shows us Holland and all its principal cities. Those cities that have won freedom for religious and scientific debate by their united efforts. The painting also shows a virtuoso display of painterly realism in the chandelier and the precise formal patterns that underpin the apparent naturalism. Yet, to the end of his career, Vermeer could still produce something to surprise us.
This is one of the most wonderful works, a work that really is quite misunderstood. It's a late painting, very end of Vermeer's career in the 1670s. And it shows a woman playing her guitar quite openly and happily, rather than the very self-contained, very quiet, reflective paintings of the 1660s. Here she's kind of bursts out of the painting. She's suddenly put off to the side, and you as a viewer confront her immediately. One of the most wonderful things about this painting is the way he gives us a sense of joy and happiness, but mostly with the strings that you see very loosely painted, as though the strings are actually vibrating as she's strumming away. It's a sense of momentary quality and lifelikeness that makes this painting so incredibly different and so appealing. What you suddenly discover is paint seen as paint. And he is very bold in his accents of paint on the wonderful angular folds of the skirt, or particularly here in the music hall in the middle of this instrument. It's an extraordinary abstract form as he sort of suggests the glitter of the gold as the light reflects off it. It is this kind of abstraction of form tied into the character of the image that makes this painting so wonderful.